Hello to all my channel viewers. What follows is a very interesting and enjoyable interaction with my esteemed colleague in the intuitive arts, Lena Rodriguez of Tarot Down Under. Lena is a great communicator as well as a very skillful intuitive, and her knowledge of world history and politics is deep and insightful. In the context of tarot, astrology, and intuition, we talked about current events, including the Ukraine crisis, Putin, Zelenskyy, the USA, NATO, Trump, etc. Now, though we may not have solved the problems of the world, I think we certainly gave it a pretty good crack. Here I am with Lena Rodriguez. Welcome to Astrology Alert. We're going to have a session where we're going to try to solve all the problems of the world by looking into astrology and into tarot.
No problem. Thank you for having me here, Andre.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So I think the thing we probably should focus on, the topic we should focus on right away is the situation in Ukraine, because it's such a pressing issue and everybody is glued to their TV sets and their social media and their internet, trying to keep track of what is going on, especially in light of the way it's turned out for Putin. And he seems like a man that is feeling increased pressure, and he's making more and more belligerent statements that are pretty scary.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could jump in at the deep end here. I think, is he capable of ordering a nuclear strike? Do you think?
I think he's capable. The question is, if you order a nuclear strike, what happens then? And that seems to me to be a pretty, I wouldn't call it a bold move, a pretty crazy move that would result in his own destruction. There's no real way to win a nuclear war, even if...
No, exactly. And on your own border, it's too mad. It's too mad.
Exactly, yes. But this is the thing, that when someone feels tremendous pressure, and given his penchant for manufacturing reasons, because he'll say, I'm doing it because of such and such, and it's never true, then if he is going to do something like that, it's not like you'll need a reason, right? But the reason would be feeling hemmed in, overwhelmed. The response has been, I think, quite unexpected, to get the entire world, Switzerland, I mean, everyone, is on board.
He could not have dreamt this would be the reaction. We could not have dreamt it would be as solid as it is, the entire world.
It's true.
They were saying in the EU Parliament last night that I was watching, they took various measures and votes, and they said for the first time, he got no support. He got votes against and some abstained, probably China. I haven't looked at the fine print. Not one country in support.
Yeah, no, it's
even his own satellite states.
Exactly. It's pretty remarkable, including the part that is really eye-popping is, I think I counted, 20. A lot of countries are sending weapons to Ukraine.
Yes.
Trying to get weapons. So it's not just like, well, we condemn and we approve. It's like, here's some armament. I mean, this is serious stuff. So in that way, it's dicey. It's dicey because he interprets it as an attack on him, and why aren't you letting me do what I want to do? They go out before the United Nations. Lavrov, they walked out on him today. He was doing a speech and they just walked out. So there's total disdain. And one of their lines was, well, why does America get to invade Iraq and we can't do this? Well, because it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. I mean, part of the thing is that Ukraine is a functioning democracy. That's the point. The point is that, if you invade a democracy, you're really violating the tenets of the West. The West is supposed to represent thriving democracies, right? So you're going against the system. And but it's scary because they're armed to the teeth. They're armed to the teeth in Russia. So it's a scary situation. What have you seen when you've done your cards and intuition? What's your sense of Putin's, situation, mindset,
He's very hard to read, probably not surprisingly.
Yeah. That's what he works at. He works at that constantly.
Absolutely. But I think there's a fragility there now that has not been there in previous years. We've spoken on various channels. He does not look well, but he's become progressively isolated. And I think that's a classic trajectory of tyrants. You know, so you gather around your henchmen in the early days, in his case, the oligarchs plus the generals, and that worked for so many years. But now he doesn't trust anybody. That's just not me. That's understood. So he's genuinely completely isolated. So my feeling is he's just ping-ponging around in his own head. He can't quite conceive of what is happening. I don't think he actually can believe it.
Yeah, that's exactly my perception as well. And interesting, you mentioned the ping pong in his head, and the misperception, the misalignment. It's in his chart. His chart is not. I mean, any astrologer would have told him not a good idea. Not now. This is not cool. It doesn't line up well. But of course, he's not going to consult astrologer. So he go in, and it's the classic short-term expansive energy of Jupiter, followed by all kinds of problem aspects later, right? Which is, I mentioned in one of my videos, George W. Bush fell for that when he launched the Iraq War. Then he says, mission accomplished, and he's not seeing the Saturn, moving in that was going to crunch him because, there were problems, right? But he didn't know this, and so the response has been terrible, from his perspective. And this thing about the angles in his chart suggesting potential health, for sure, it's there as well. So
let me just pull some cards on his health and his mental health right now as we speak, and see what turns up here. He's sitting here as the King of Wands. He often gets the Emperor card, but at the moment in this spread, check these out. The Moon and all the old associations with the Moon of mental health, of literally lunacy, barking at the moon. I think he's not listening to anybody.
I like that barking.
Look at these cards, they speak for themselves. He might even have to escape to somewhere safe. This might get that dramatic. Not long for that. I think this is him in terms of his mental health now. He's thinking, at least I've got my hundreds of billions somewhere I can leave if it all falls over. But I don't know that he can, with frozen assets and all this stuff raining down on his head. But I think there's, for the first time in his political life, well, the second time, I'll explain that in a moment, he's thinking of moving away. That's interesting. But I can tell you one thing, he's not sleeping.
Yeah. Nine of Swords. Yes, that makes sense.
I'd just like to share a little story here. You may already know it, but when the Berlin Wall fell, was that 89, I think? 89. Remember, he was in Dresden, in Germany, holding line. There were 3 of them in a building. I will always think of it as KGB. It might have become FSB, but it'll always be KGB. The word came from Berlin that the crowds had gathered at the gate. He rushed down in their Stasi block with all these files to the incinerator that was below ground, right, in the basement. He spent several hours just throwing paperwork into the incinerator. When he came back upstairs, the other 2 Russians had left. Putin was alone in this building. Do you know this story?
I do. I know the story, and he I think. Well, I know. Remind me, because I remember reading it, but can't remember the details. I know that he went out to talk to the crowd and said something. But continue. Yes.
Exactly. And he was only young then. He was maybe 30 something, and he had to bluff his way out of this situation. And so he said from the balcony, "We've got you surrounded by snipers, disperse now, disperse now." There were no snipers. There was nothing. It was just him. He survived that night and that moment, but that cultivated this deep, visceral fear of the mob, of the public. And if you look at footage of Putin's actual inauguration as president, you can see the black car with Putin in it, the escort cars, and as the camera pans back, there's not a human in Moscow. They shut the entire city of Moscow. He was so paranoid then. So imagine what's going on now.
Yeah,
this is his worst nightmare unfolding.
It makes sense, and it's reflected in the chart that I think is most logical for Putin, even though some people say no, it's 2 years earlier, and other proposed charts. This always happens with public figures. The chart that's been around for him for decades. I've known about it since 2000. I think is well reflective, and he's got all those 12th house planets. It's classic for a KGB operative, someone who's working in the background. But then, in a personal sense, it can make for a person that is suspicious, of course, paranoid, and especially very deceptive. He's got the Neptune Mercury. He reminds me a lot of Trump. I mean, they basically lie constantly. What comes out of their mouth, you can almost always say, no, whatever he's saying, think the opposite, or think of some cynical maneuvering that he's doing. The thing is, he's more effective than Trump because he's more organized and more practical.
Yes, that's right. Infinitely more organized.
So when Trump says he's very smart, he's right. He's relative to him, he is. Yes, of course. There's no doubt about that. But of course, most people are relative to Trump. So maybe it's not that much of a thing. But
So maybe what's revealing is if he is going progressively mad, for want of a better word, or stressed or pressured, the world needs to know how his henchmen are going to behave. Do you see what I mean? They are actually critical. Will they carry out his orders at the very worst, or will there be what's your sense astrologically?
When you said that, what popped into my mind from his chart, what I know of his chart, is there's a cycle happening that already puts him in anything from danger to grave danger already this month. And I'm not joking around, it's there. But as we move toward the summer, he then goes into a period where he is vulnerable to his own helpers, much like Trump has had all these people that have betrayed him, because eventually people, for their own reasons, they just bail and they say, I'm not going to support you anymore. And Putin's cycles by May, June, July, August are really problematic around his inner circle, where there could be someone that, or a group, that works against him. So that's one possibility around. Because if you think about it, how else would he get in trouble in the current situation?
Yes,
it would probably have to be, if not a coup, something that would happen to put him in peril that way. But it's definitely there. So anyway, that was my intuitive hit.
Yes. Because their role will be critical for Russia moving forward as much as anything. Yes.
Yeah, and then depending on what's going on, the way this thing is going, you could have a lot of social unrest by then, because he's literally making it happen. He's creating this problem.
Yes.
What are the immediate gains to conquering Ukraine? None. The only thing that he's doing is he's getting really terrible media, because now it's everywhere. This is the other problem. We're not in 1989.
That's right.
The tapestry now, there are images everywhere. So, I mean, satellites. Yes. I heard that Elon Musk provided one of his satellites. I mean, he's doing Tesla cars over here and giving you satellites over there. And all of this is coming together, not in his favor, not in Putin's favor. So
Yes.
it's pretty tough. And then if you've got, feeling hemmed in, you're not getting much of a big victory by winning anything in Ukraine, and there's all this economic pressure. The only problem is that it's, I hate to say it, a bit of a bomb waiting to blow. They've got to get a hold of this guy before he does something stupid. That's my hope and my prayer.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I'll tell you this though. The one thing I'll tell you really quickly is that I had said this in one of my videos. What I noticed that is very curious is that Biden's chart is really looking up and smooth and nice as Putin's is declining.
Yeah.
And because he's the counterpart. Like normally, if this thing goes really poorly for the US, Biden's wouldn't look good. It would look terrible. And not only does Biden's look good, it looks good internationally, where it looked terrible last year. It's really nice going into the middle of the year, which suggests he's got the upper hand, in the matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a certain irony here I was only thinking about last night, which is the Trump years weakened NATO, which was part of Putin's agenda, obviously. That's why Trump was useful to him. And yet what happened was the EU now have realised we've got to fight. They've had Brexit as well. We have to join together and be strong in the face of this threat. And so it's whoosh, it's really brought NATO countries together in an unprecedented way.
Correct.
And made them stronger than they were prior.
Correct. And Biden is getting credit, but I don't think not enough credit for this, because the US tends to be the driving energy. And he was the one that really worked to, and you see it in his chart, by the way, that's Biden's greatest strength, is his ability to form alliances and partnerships. So he brings all these countries together. And then, of course, I'm sure it's not just Biden. These countries are looking at the situation and thinking, this is not acceptable. So, Germany now, of course, then the joke, you hear the jokes, Germany is arming up again, and people go, oh no. But still, it's, the world is changing. It's the current context, but it's telling you that they're pretty serious about it. And the other thing too, though, is what is your sense of, if you look more broadly around the time we're in, because there's this thing that people would say, well, democracies are under attack, and there is a world push to bring, to return to fascist regimes, perhaps in the way China does it, or even worse, the way it was in Europe in the 1940s. What is your sense of that?
Well, here's the thing. We've got to remember, this is my sociology speaking now. We've got to remember that democracy is a social model. It's not the only way human beings can organise. We know there are other less pleasant. You gave the Churchill quote. Democracies are basically ugly and messy, but they're better than the alternative. So different countries do democracy differently. Sure. Now, I think what's happened is there's no doubt a huge swing to the right everywhere, no doubt. I see that as what happens with working class men. This is 40 years now into neoliberalism. That was Thatcher and Reagan sending all the manufacturing jobs offshore so the capitalist class could get cheap labor. We all got sucked into the $5 T-shirts, didn't want to pay $40 for one that was made in America. Right, so this huge push that disenfranchise working class men, who are the ones feeding into the right everywhere. They've lost their status as they see it. Then they blame the poor, hard-working immigrant next door for the fact they haven't got a job, when in fact it's because the capitalist class failed to pick up and give substitute employment to those men. Yeah. So I think that's the background to the right. Now what I think we're seeing is an inevitable, hopefully even this horrific situation in Ukraine symbolizes this is what democracy is about. This is people very bravely defending their right to vote. And I think it's a zeitgeist zeitgeist, you know, in that sense. We are seeing a wave and things happen, as you know, as an astrologer, when the time is there. They can be the best intentioned thing in the world, but if it's not their time, they go nowhere. You'd have to feel this wave, I think, is instrumental in helping the pendulum swing back.
Swing back.
So that's my feel. I'm ultimately optimistic, short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic.
So when you say swing back, what do you mean by swing back? Swing back to?
Well, I think swing back to the fundamentals of what is the right to vote. So you have, what the right's always been good at is co-opting words like liberty and freedom. You know, they're always really good at that.
Yeah.
And so meanwhile, the system has got eroded over time. The American democracy, for example, and it's only one form, I want to stress this. Traditionally, half the eligible voters didn't vote in American elections, right? A full half couldn't be bothered voting.
It's true. Yeah.
And now I think that's changing, and the majority of people, I think, are more humane and decent fundamentally than the very loud voices of the hate and the right. So whether that's because, for example, a Catholic grandmother that I'm familiar with went to vote in Australia in favour of gay marriage. And I said to her, I'm very surprised, you know. And she said, no, the time's come. You know, I love my boys, you know, referring to the gay grandson and stuff. And I want them to be good citizens, and they have every right. Now, in her lifetime, she has come to that position. Right. So I think it's not a matter of hitting people over the head. You should be more lenient. You should do this and you must do that. I think it's always about the demonizing of the other. For people who don't know a single Black person, it's very easy to demonize Black people. When you put children together, everyone plays together, whether they're Jewish or Arab or of any persuasion, any religion. Children are taught to hate. So that was a long answer, sorry. The pendulum, I don't think it's going to swing back to where it was, but it's got to swing back from where it is.
True, it's true. And the astrology, as I understand it, is the fact that, okay, so the big cycles. Number one, the position of Pluto, which in the 1930s, when it was in Cancer. So Cancer, the Cancer-Capricorn polarity, that's the government and homeland polarity. And when Pluto was discovered, that was the beginning of the nuclear age on one level, but it was the fascist, the fascist uprisings and all of that in the 30s. And it lasted until Pluto got out. Well, it needed to get into Leo a little bit, but it's that range. And then Pluto in Capricorn, the other angle, the other side of that, happens starting in 2008, and it's now near the end. Pluto is 2 years away from moving into the next sign. And in this case, even more than in the 30s, the next sign is Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of the people. It's the sign of democracy. You see this, for example, in the States. I did this look back, and I noticed in the Saturn cycles, you can go back to the Civil War period in 30-year increments. Every time Saturn is in Aquarius, we elect a progressive government. And it used to be that Republicans were the Democrats and vice versa. Now, up to about 1930, if you elected someone like Teddy Roosevelt or people in the 19th century, they were the progressive, presidents. And then going forward from there, Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, and now Biden, always Saturn in Aquarius, which is what we're in now. And so Aquarius is where the world is moving, because Pluto is moving into Aquarius. Pluto will go into Aquarius and be there for 2 decades. The danger with Aquarius, and this is where I think is going to go next, is that Aquarius, because it rules groups, it necessarily rules corporations. And then you can already see what's going to happen, right? That
Mhm.
Probably this fascistic thing is going to get pushed back, and democracies will come back online, so to speak. The problem being, though, that corporations, as soon as there's a power vacuum, they move in. I mean, already we have a problem with corporations being too strong. It's going to
Yes.
get worse.
And I'd like to say something about that, because what we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years, again, neoliberalism, which is privatize everything, let business determine all government decisions. And so we've seen corporate lobbyists. The word lobby sort of suggests you put your case and do that. No, it's on to the point where they've bought the votes outright all over the world, not just America. It's happened in Australia too. What used to be you'd spend money to get influence with the government, but not a guarantee. So I also think corporations have gone as far as they can in terms of exploiting workers. So you have Amazon, for example, with notoriously bad working conditions. So any people watching this, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand if you're on the production line wrapping things for Amazon, you're not allowed to speak to people either side. You have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom like a 5-year-old, right? You have no proper conditions and so forth. So I hope you'll bear me out astrologically, but you can't make it happen. This is my fantasy, that people will demand more of corporations. Yeah. So it's like the Scandinavian model, if you like, social democrats. People can become millionaires in Scandinavia, many have. But the difference is you have to pay your workers really well. They have to have maternity leave, paternity leave, paid annual leave. Your supply chain has to be ethically sourced, not the cheapest and the dirtiest. Once you comply with those things and you take care of, carbon products that you produce and stuff, after that it's profit.
Yeah.
And off you go, Pep. Yeah. Right? Yeah, so that's what I would like to see, is just demanding more of the corporations. And if they do this, and this, yeah. The first thing, of course, would be paying tax. Corporations paying tax. Yeah. Now, I'm old enough, I've been hearing for 40 years, oh, well, and this is just wealthy individuals as well as corporations. Oh, well, what they're doing isn't illegal. It's a loophole. Well, close the loophole. I've been waiting for 45 years for them to change these loopholes, right? Yeah. So I don't think they should pay more. You might remember in the 70s and 80s in France and in a lot of places, progressive taxation, right? So the more money you had, the more tax you paid, ridiculous sums of money. You could be taxed 90% of your earnings. So of course, everyone, that's when the tax havens started, right? I don't want that. I'm not an advocate of progressive taxation. Make it 25%, but everyone pays it.
Yeah, I mean, make it whatever you're going to make it, but
exactly.
Make it fair. I mean, the thing about progressive taxation, though, you see, I've brought that up with people who are virulently against raising taxes, and I say to them, yeah, but the US was really prosperous under that really high taxation.
When they did have progressive taxation, that's true.
Because, it's 90% of something at a high income level. It's not 90% of all your income. It just says...
No,
it says
I understand.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean...
I do understand. Yeah. But here's and I've changed my position on this. I used to be a progressive taxer, right? And here's the thing. Because America is such a big player, I think the problem is, and AOC is an advocate of it, if you understand economics and history, you can make a strong case, there's no doubt. However, the problem is you leave everyday people behind, because in the American context, if you said, oh, we're taxing the rich 90%, now, it was different back in the day, but now, everyone in America harbors this dream of being really rich. So they think it's risking their potential earnings somehow. You know, what if I'm rich? Then I'll have to pay all this tax. Right? It almost pushes them to vote against it because they don't understand the subtleties and realities of the economics. So it's an easier sell, is my point.
It's true.
You pay 20%, I pay 20%, Google pays 20%, is easier to get across, and it's better than nothing.
It's true. No, and you're totally right that the crime is in being able to make a lot of money and hire really good lawyers and accountants, so you pay no tax, and the amount you spend on lawyers and accountants is far less than the tax you're paying. I mean, the whole thing is a racket. It's horrible.
Yes, of course.
Amazon can just say, well, I'm just not going to pay any tax, and you're making billions of dollars. That's completely unfair. So you're right, whichever the system, it has to equalize. But I do think that when with Pluto and Aquarius, it does go toward the people. It does now, but then the problem becomes, this always happens, is you may get some improvement, and then the system starts to slowly get corrupted, and corporations finding the angles, they'll be hiring people to, hey, is there a way to get around this? What are the rules? Let's try to break them. But then that's just life. Life is complicated, it's messy. I mean,
Yes, it's true. But I wonder what you think about this. The only way that would be different this time is if socially we revisit our relationship to wealth and celebrity and all these things. So let me explain that, what I'm thinking. At the moment, if someone has exposure and becomes famous, and if someone is very wealthy, there's this idea that they're clever, they work harder than everyone else, they deserve this attention, right? Whereas if you ask me, someone who gets out of bed at 3 a.m. to clean the toilets at the train stations is someone who works hard, right? So I guess what I'm saying is there hope, do you think, that people will expect more largesse from the wealthy? I'd like to see a situation where people were embarrassed to be exposed as spending $45,000 on a handbag. Sure. Right?
That's true. No, it's true.
You know what I mean? So maybe that if you're making a lot of money, there's an idea that you can genuinely contribute to cancer research or whatever the thing is for you, some social moral obligation. Do you see any of that potential?
That to me, it's almost more of a hope. I always hope that an age of enlightenment, like if you think about Aquarius, the idea that it's the group and you share your wealth, you share your knowledge, and you always hope that because people that are wealthier, this is not, for the most part, it's not a barbaric situation like it was when you would, take your horse and your weapon and kill people to get your wealth. Now it's all brain power. The people that are smarter figure out ways to make themselves wealthier, but then the next step has to be that consciousness rises to where instead of being greedy and self-centered and egotistical and looking for vanity and looking for approval, you have more of a sense of giving back. In a way, there I have to admire Bill Gates compared to Bezos, because Gates seems to have a much bigger social conscience. He said,
exactly.
I get all this money, I need to give it back. It's social money. I mean, and so now he's still really rich, and he has all kinds of problems, etc. But in comparison, he is thinking more that way. And if billionaires thought that way, then in a way, it's okay if you were a billionaire. The problem is that most of them don't. And as a class.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that there might be some sort of thing. He shouldn't be such a freak. Richard Branson also, had a social conscience about a range of things and stuff. So if they could use that wealth in that way, I mean, it's interesting for me. I married into a Pacific Island family 30 odd years ago, and I watch how Polynesian children are raised. And what happened to this day, if say there was a 6-year-old there and you gave that 6-year-old a chocolate bar, Right. The first thing that 6-year-old does is count all the kids and will break that bar without anyone saying anything into that many pieces. Right? From naught, you're taught to be part of the collective, right, not the individual, right? So it's a fundamentally different mindset. And when we look at history, we inevitably look at the history of war, conquering, and so forth. And we don't look at cultures that do it differently. So, for example, do you remember that book, The Lord of the Flies? We had to read it when we were young, right? You know, and yes, it was the horror story of these boys. This is what humans do when they're under survival stress. They will turn to cannibalism, right? Now, in the 60s, there was a group of Tongan children who were left on an island, same thing, their dinghy was blown off, and it was months and months and months till they were found. The difference was they were all healthy. They had, you know, created shelter. One had broken a leg. The other worked out how to do a splint. So to do it, they fed him and gave him water while he was incapacitated. When he was better, he could contribute to what was going on. No one hears that story.
Yeah, no, it's true. Right? It's totally true. Yeah, I mean, it's that difference between, you could almost say the animal realm we're supposedly evolving out of, and into the potential of the human realm, you know, to be compassionate and to be, you know, to have that consciousness that realizes it's one being. You know, we're all one energy. We're not separate. But that's an evolution, you know, that if I look at it astrologically, the problem I have with that in the near term is that the last major planet that was discovered, the one that appended Pluto, because Eris was discovered in 2005, and it caused the astronomy world to start doing somersaults because they found other similar sized ones. And so I use Eris as the key planet in the new array. There are others, but that one to me is the most important. And the meanings of that planet in a lot of ways make things worse. In part, they make it better because it symbolizes the rising power of women. And that's good, because women need to rise to counterbalance the insanity of men. There's no doubt about that. And I think that's good. The problem is that this planet is also associated with cutthroat competition and for resources and for all kinds of things. So I'm almost praying for, you know, you heard this thing that they think there's this planet 9 that is way out there, that is really big. And I keep thinking, oh, if that planet could just be like a really, you know, consciousness raising planet, that when the humanity finds it, because those synchronicities are deadly accurate. When you find the planet, then it's like it tells you humanity is encountering that realm. Like, to give you an example, Uranus was discovered right around when the Industrial Revolution was kicking into gear, electricity. And that's exactly what that planet rules. And I mean, literally rules that, right? So you know that these things are accurate. So I'm praying for something like that, because from what we have now, I think, I mean, if things can improve, but I'm not sure that you'll see all of a sudden in 2025, 2030, all the billionaires of the world becoming, you know, compassionate human beings and behaving in a way that would be good for the entire community. I think that they're still into owning their jets. And I mean, look at this guy that owns Chelsea. I just found out the guy has 6 jets. How many jets do you need?
Look, it's obscene, isn't it? It's absolutely obscene.
And his house is worth $200 million. That is some house, right? By the way, you said earlier about Putin, and you said he wants to leave, right? He can leave with maybe he can take his money. I don't know how much of it is in Switzerland, but I hear that he has a house in Russia that is like something out of this world. I mean, worth billions of dollars. Something
apparently, and that's where Navalny comes into the story. Yes, because Navalny worked out the actual value of, you know, the bathroom, the thing, and he's running essentially on that, combating. Mind you, I don't think Navalny's the nicest guy in the world, because he's anti-immigrant and other things.
Is he? See, I haven't followed him a lot, so he is anti-immigrant.
Yeah, but sometimes you need the man of the moment, you know, to counter whatever's happening. So that is very interesting. This whole idea that one person or 3 people or 25 people can own this. Well, the imbalance represented in every country with the and America is the most unequal country in the world because the wealth is private and the debts are public, and it has the biggest actual disparity in the world. The problem is, until working people realise why that is and who is shafting them, that will not change.
It's true. It's 100% true. Yeah. Until that happens, I mean, my sense is that, and I might be off on this, but my sense is that it's all pivoting. If I just look at the US, the next 2 or 3 election cycles, the ones coming up this year, the 24 cycle, and the one after that, in terms of resolving this insanity. I mean, it almost feels like people here are drinking some kind of Kool-Aid, you know, we're talking about millions of people who approve of people like Putin. And I mean, I ask myself, especially when you're over 60, you don't have enough intuition to know a thug when you see one. I mean, honestly, just open your eyes, open your perception. It's obvious. A guy like Trump is an idiot. You know, what is there to say about Trump?
2 minutes in his company, you would recognize that.
15 seconds, 2 minutes. 2 minutes is way too long.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. But here's the thing that I think is fascinating at this very moment we're at. All this pro-Russian stuff that has the GOP, right, that has leached into the GOP and the thinking and the pro-Russian. This means it's very hard for them to hide. Now the entire world is focusing on Putin. It takes away all that power that they built up over the last Trump years.
Exactly.
Of go Russia.
Exactly. And see, here is where you do see the hand of fate, because they had this narrative they were cultivating. And people like Tucker Carlson, Putin. Now he's saying, I never said anything about Putin. Sure. I mean, you're on tape 100 different times. So now the actual events are confronting the world. You've been saying, oh, this guy's was great. You know, he's a strong man. He does have his shirt on, sitting on the horse. He's killing people. Now defend that argument, including Trump. He's kind of backtracking.
Yes.
I condemn it, but he's really smart. Man is incoherent. Is he smart or are you condemning it? Which is it? And so it's pretty obvious that the circumstance, yes, it has definitely pushed them back. No doubt about it. So there's where a horrible situation could be a good thing in a broader sense. But
yes.
How do we say that when people are dying in Ukraine? I mean, children, women, I mean, it's insane. It's insane that this has to happen at that cost, you know? It's horrible.
I think the only heartwarming thing that is important to keep in the front of the house, so to speak, this horror could be unfolding in obscurity and people turning away and not following it. That's the only thing that's worse, right?
Yes.
Is, whatever, that's over there. But there's this unique situation where no one's looking away and people are doing the most extraordinary things to help. Like I just saw 2 days ago, there was a soccer match in the UK between Everton and Manchester City. And there are 2 Ukrainian players for Everton. And they ran onto the pitch first, they embraced each other, and then the whole of the rest of the Everton team came on draped in Ukrainian flags. And then Manchester City came out of the tunnel wearing newly minted jackets, no war. Now that's... The West is fully united and pushing back. And this I think is the unexpected. I didn't expect it. I thought they're going to be, haphazard. But, notice that this is what Trump was trying to do. He was trying to destroy NATO. He constantly spoke against NATO. And I think that fooled Putin. Putin thought it would be like 2014. And, now Trump is saying, if I had been the president, this wouldn't have happened. You're a total liar. If he had been president, he would have let Putin walk in. And he would have said, oh, well, it's like when he said about the Kurds. It's their land, and why are we saying anything? It's historically their land, so Russia should take it. But in fact, at the moment, it's going the other way. As a circumstance
has dictated, which I think is a little unexpected. I do say that I think that that's fate, fate working.
Yes, I do too. Putin would have thought this is the shoe in now, NATO's weak, this is my time. He would not have dreamt of this reaction. And from watching the European Parliament last night, different speakers were getting up. And normally in any forum like that, people talk a political language, right? And it's like, yeah. The difference was everyone was just speaking like normal people.
Yeah.
And they were saying 3 days ago, we would not have thought we could even do some of these things that we've done. This is people in the middle of the night on the phone to each other going, how can we get heavier sanctions? How can we get Switzerland? And they've done it. They've gone way beyond the usual brief. And they're very comfortable lifestyles in Brussels, right?
Exactly.
There's another leap again, because Europe remembers war, right? This is the fundamental difference.
And the thing is, you see, where this is so tragic is that you see they show you these images of this convoy, and you say, well, look at this convoy. It's 40 miles long, and they're going to be bringing in murder and mayhem into Kiev and in other cities. And then you think, well, this is time for the US Air Force or the NATO Air Force to blow up the convoy. Well, then you start a war. And the problem with that is that if you force Putin to not, in other words, you have to take away the reaction part, because if you do something, he'll react and say, you caused me to do this. As it is,
yes,
he's got full control and he has to start something himself. So it puts him in a really bad spot. But the problem is at the cost of Ukrainian life. And this is the problem with life on Earth. I mean, you're always choosing the lesser of two evils. It's
yes,
horrible, right?
It's so true.
You get these situations where you think, well, this is bad and this is worse. You got to take the bad. Politics is like that, by the way. I often get frustrated with Democrats in that is that they want it to be perfect and they don't realize that it's always important. It's like a chess game. Take what you can get. Don't tell me that Hillary Clinton is a problem. What are you talking about? Have you seen the other person?
Yeah, that's right.
That should be your choice. Choose wisely, right? So
yes.
This is the unfortunate part of this. So, but your sense though are we kind of on the same page around? Do we feel that Putin is basically running himself into more trouble as time passes?
I agree. That is my sense, but bigger than that, because this doesn't look or feel like previous military excursions in terms of the world is distinguishing between Putin and the Russian people. Normally, we'd be inundated with this, Russia's doing, and we are. I mean, of course, there's headlines, Russia doing, but when you peel back, what people are saying is Putin is doing this, and people can identify with the Russians going to the ATMs and not being able to get any money. And what do you do from that point if you've got children, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's progress in humanitarian terms to actually sympathize with the people of the aggressing country. It separates militaristic leadership from the people.
That's a good point.
And I haven't seen that before.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. That's an excellent point. And you said earlier too, it links to the information age, because as I often say to people, how do you know anything? We're sitting here talking, you don't know. The reason you know anything is because of the media. Now, yes, there will be fake media and real media. We'll have to discover which is which. But if you know anything, it's because it's been broadcast. That you can see it, and then And this is an era where even for Russia, in fact, this amazes me, because the irony is this guy is a disinformation king, and he's losing the battle through the information.
He's losing the battle of the hackers too. This is another thing where technology is not his friend at the moment.
No, I mean, I saw some Ukrainian top government officials saying they had hacked into the into the stock market and into the ATMs in Russia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
it's like, to me, it's like the end of conventional warfare. We thought we were there, and then this happened, and it's like the final push of the universe going, no, I told you this isn't going to be the way forward anymore, you know. So regardless, and it's not that I'm hardening my heart to the individual pain and suffering, but it has to be, because it's so public and so sustained, a different outcome than had he done this a year ago.
Yeah, it's a good point. Very good point. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Yeah, truly. I have a question for you. Maybe you can set some people's mind at ease, or maybe you'll do the opposite.
Or not.
Former, but, on the former, orange menace that we had to endure here for years. And I'm sure you've seen my perspective and the astrology.
Yeah.
What is yours? How do you sense his forward path?
Yes, it's. I think we're going to see an unraveling rather than anything else. I think, because I was hugely shocked with that news last week about the prosecutors walking out of New York, right out of that case, and protesting, saying, because many of us thought, well, at least it was going to be like Al Capone. He would be down on taxes, right? That was keeping us all going on some level. Mm-hmm. And then that happened. That, to me, was the darkest day in all the work I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay. Do you know something about that, though? I'm going to tell you something really quickly.
Yes.
It's interesting that the astrology verified that, although I missed it at the time. I was doing something else, and then I looked.
That happens.
So he had a Jupiter flyby transit, and that news came out. But now, what I hear, and this is because Autumn, Sebastian told me this, they're replacing the prosecutors with a woman. And she sent me the chart just for the day, and I immediately, just at a glance, I spotted 2 or 3 things that lead me to believe this woman is likely going to be the problem for Trump. And this fits with that other thing that I mentioned about how Eris, the woman planet, is basically out to hunt him down. When you look at all the trouble is Letitia James, Fannie Willis, it's almost like you need another woman prosecutor to be part of this as well.
Maybe, so, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
But I think this is a long answer to your question, but Letitia James' case, even though it's civil and she can't send them to jail, she can disband Trump.org. All right. And I suspect she will. Now, that to me, when she signs off on that to me is symbolically the end of Trump, because he is Trump.org. That's his total identity. He's constructed his whole family existence and his working life and everything around this ridiculous organization. And that to me is the end. You know what I mean? Like, then he'll just be having to go with his cap in his hand. No one will want to lend him money outside of the United Arab Emirates. So I think he's going to be a spent force down the track. But here's the problem, Andre. How are these midterms going to play out? Because he'll still be a force probably by then. And they're more important, I think, than even 2024. Because if the Dems lose seats in 2022, God help America. So what's your sense, astrologically and personally, on the 22 election?
To my credit here, or to astrology's credit, I was saying in the middle of last year, I remember doing a video where I said, why is Biden so happy in November of 2022? Because I know the aspect. It's pretty clear. The Jupiter in a station, trining your 2 key planets. This is choice, right? And then I'm thinking, well, you're going to lose the House and the Senate, even one of them, and it's lethal. So then, but now I didn't know this was going to happen this year, but to me, this horrific situation plays to the Democrats' favor, because it causes the kind of upending to the narrative that they're trying to cultivate. And because it's putting Biden in a better light and it's shifting the public focus to something different. It's also, as we said earlier, highlighting the brutality of, fascist rule, people like Putin, essentially people like Trump, basically.
Yes.
So it causes a big problem for the Republicans. And this may not turn out the way they're thinking, even though the media has said many times, oh, they're going to win for sure because of blah, 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 the votes and this and that. I'm not convinced. I think my feeling is that they're going to hang on, and which of course is terrible news for Trump from that point. But his chart says that too. Sorry.
But I think that to put those two questions together, if the Dems win clearly in midterms, Trump is gone politically, because they can't keep flying. He lost them the original election despite everything. They've backed him through everything. And if he loses that, you'd have to think that was the end of him as a political force, if nothing else.
Even if at this stage, even a close win is lethal, because elections are like that. They focus the narrative in whichever direction. The winner by one vote wins. So, matter of fact, I've often thought that the irony of this whole thing is that because Trump lost relatively closely, even though he lost by 7 million in the Electoral College, it was tight, that kept him viable, and that caused the Republican Party to continue to worship him, which is a huge mistake. He's destroying them. This guy, the guy that wrote that book, everything that Trump touches dies. That's exactly true.
Yeah. I wish I'd said that first.
He's the man is a loser telling you that he's a winner. He's not a winner.
Yes.
Basically, he's a bankrupter. He's a bull in a china shop. Everything that he goes near, kaput, it explodes, right? So now he's doing it to the Republican Party, as I see.
Exactly. He's only ever lost money in business.
Yeah.
He's never made money. It's extraordinary. How people do, I think GOP will be split for quite some time.
Which is good. Good.
Absolutely. It'll splinter off. And what I'm praying for is a lot of these voters who consume Fox and equivalent ideas and so forth, in the great American tradition, they just might not turn out to vote at all. There's, I think, a high chance of that. They're embarrassed, on some level, or they've convinced, or they just can't be bothered anymore, or their people aren't winning, or whatever it is. I hope that's enough. That could make the difference. That block of voters and non-voters could make the difference.
You just need some. I mean, look what happened with the Senate. The Senate is currently Democratic because Trump was telling the Georgia voters not to vote. This happened. This is another example of a loss. The man is an idiot, and McConnell was saying, stop. He kept talking and talking. And then they voted less in the follow-up to the way they voted weeks before. So this is telling you. And
two black candidates got up in Georgia. It couldn't have happened normally until he waded in.
Right, exactly. So and this continues. He's been heard to say, if you do not publicize and keep beating the drum that the election was stolen, then my people won't vote, or Republicans won't vote. He's actually saying that. And I read a story where some of the GOP internal machinery in the form of people were really worried because they were seeing these polls of people who weren't going to vote because it doesn't matter, it's all rigged, and this isn't good news. And you don't need everybody, you need a block, a percentage.
Yes,
so
that's
all you need. So then Fox that way in a way has made it worse because they've kept these people inflamed, and they keep saying there's something wrong with the voting. You have to ask yourself, is this really the way you want to present the case? Because you need these people to vote. Not to mention, this is where it gets really nuts, that Fox has been, all of them are vaccinated, and they keep saying you shouldn't get vaccinated. And whenever you see the death rates, it's all the unvaccinated. These are your voters. You need them to vote for you.
Yes.
You're killing them off.
It's really a crime. Fox is actually a crime against humanity.
Well, and against your own voters. How about
they've killed their own viewers
and their own voters? These are people. Think about it. The people that are most likely to be anti-vaccine are the people that are most likely to vote Republican. Why are you killing them?
It's delirious.
It's crazy. It's completely crazy. Now that we've solved all the problems of the world.
Look.
But we should do this again because that was a lot of fun. I'm sure on any topic, we could go into some depth.
Yes, we absolutely must do it. And it's been enormous fun. And thank you for letting me have such a vent.